They say blood is thicker than water, but nobody warns you that sometimes blood can poison you from the inside out. My name is Eleanor Vance. I'm 67 years old, and the person I loved most in this world has been slowly erasing me from my own life. I didn't see it happening. I trusted too much, loved too deeply, and believed that the little girl I raised from diapers could never betray the woman who sacrificed everything to give her a future. I was wrong about so many things, but here's what I wasn't wrong about. The human mind knows when something's wrong, even when everyone around you insists you're losing yours. Let me tell you how it started, or rather, how I finally noticed what had been happening for months right under my nose. It was a Tuesday morning in late September when I found the pill bottle in the trash. Not my trash, mind you, but the kitchen garbage at my niece Kimberly's house, where I'd been staying for the past 6 months since my diagnosis. Early-stage Alzheimer's, the doctors said, though some days I wondered if that was really true or just what everyone wanted me to believe. The bottle was prescription, with my name printed clearly on the label. Eleanor Vance, haloperidol, 5 milligrams. I stared at that bottle for a full minute, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, because I had never been prescribed haloperidol in my life. I'd been a school principal for 32 years before I retired. I knew how to research, how to investigate, how to find the truth when children were lying or when parents were covering up problems. So that afternoon, while Kimberly was at work and her husband Marcus was at his office downtown, I sat at their computer and looked up haloperidol. What I found made my hands shake so badly I could barely control the mouse. It was an antipsychotic medication, used primarily for schizophrenia and severe behavioral problems. Side effects included confusion, memory problems, difficulty concentrating, and in elderly patients, symptoms that could easily be mistaken for dementia. Someone had been giving me medication designed to make me appear mentally incompetent, and I had a terrible feeling I knew exactly who that someone was. The realization hit me like a physical blow, stealing the breath from my lungs. Kimberly, my sister Diane's daughter, the little girl I'd taken in when she was just 8 years old after Diane died in a car accident. The child I'd raised as my own when I was 32 and single and had no idea how to be a mother. The young woman I'd put through college, walked down the aisle at her wedding, supported through 2 miscarriages and a difficult marriage. The person I'd trusted with my house keys, my bank accounts, my medical decisions, and ultimately my entire life. She was drugging me. She was systematically destroying my mind to make me seem incompetent, and I needed to understand why. I thought back over the past 6 months with new clarity, seeing patterns I'd missed before because I'd been too confused, too foggy, too convinced that I was actually losing my mind. It had started last March when I'd called Kimberly crying because I couldn't remember where I'd parked my car at the grocery store. A simple mistake anyone could make, especially in a crowded parking lot. But Kimberly had insisted I see a doctor immediately. Then there was the incident with the stove I supposedly left on overnight, though I couldn't remember cooking that evening at all. The time I'd called her at 3 a.m., panicked because I didn't recognize my own bedroom, even though later I realized I'd simply been disoriented after taking what I thought was my regular sleep medication. The bills I'd allegedly forgotten to pay, the appointments I'd missed, the conversations I couldn't recall having. Every single incident had happened after Kimberly started making my morning smoothies. Those thick green concoctions she claimed were packed with brain-healthy nutrients. Every episode of confusion, every memory lapse, every moment of disorientation had followed one of those smoothies. And every single time, Kimberly had been there to document it, to express concern, to gently suggest that maybe I shouldn't be living alone anymore, that maybe it was time to consider my options, that maybe I needed more supervision. By June, I'd moved into her spare bedroom, convinced that I was becoming a danger to myself. By July, I'd signed a power of attorney giving her control over my financial decisions. By August, I'd agreed to put my house on the market because, as Kimberly gently explained, I wouldn't be needing it anymore, and the money could go toward my care, my house. The 3-bedroom colonial in Brookline that my late husband James and I had bought when we were newlyweds 40 years ago. The house where we'd dreamed of raising children, though that dream never materialized. The house I'd filled with books and music and love after James died of cancer 8 years ago. The house that was worth $1.4 million according to the most recent assessment. I'd been so grateful when Kimberly offered to handle the sale for me, so relieved that I didn't have to deal with real estate agents and paperwork and decisions while my mind felt like it was dissolving. I'd trusted her completely because she was family, because she was mine, because I'd raised her to be trustworthy and honest and good. That evening, when Kimberly came home from her job as a pharmaceutical sales representative, a detail that suddenly seemed much more significant than it had before, I was sitting in the living room pretending to watch television. She breezed in with her usual cheerful energy, her designer handbag swinging from her shoulder, her perfectly styled hair gleaming under the lights. At 35, Kimberly was beautiful in that calculated way that required significant time and money to maintain. Everything about her was expensive: her clothes, her jewelry, her car, her lifestyle. Marcus made good money as a corporate attorney, but not enough to support the kind of spending I'd noticed over the years. I'd always assumed they had investments or that Kimberly's sales job paid better than I realized. Now I understood there was another source of income they were counting on: my estate. "Hi, Aunt Elle," she said, using the nickname she'd called me since childhood. She set her bag down and came over to kiss my cheek, her perfume overwhelming in the small space. "How was your day? Did you remember to take your afternoon medication?" I looked at her carefully, searching her face for signs of guilt or deception, but she looked exactly as she always did: concerned, loving, attentive. "I took something," I said carefully, "though I'm not always sure what all these pills are for anymore." She laughed, that gentle, patient laugh that had become so familiar. "That's exactly why I need to manage your medications, Aunt Elle. It's too confusing for you to keep track of everything. But don't worry, I've got it all under control." Under control. Those words echoed in my mind like a threat. She had it all under control: my medication, my finances, my living situation, my entire life. And I'd let her take control because I'd believed I was losing my mind, because I'd trusted her, because I'd loved her. "Kimberly," I said slowly, watching her reaction, "have you been giving me haloperidol?" Her expression didn't change, not even a flicker. "Haloperidol? No, Aunt Elle. Where would you get that idea?" She sat down next to me, taking my hand in hers. "Is this about your medications again? We went over this with Dr. Patterson last month. You're taking Aricept for your memory, Seroquel to help you sleep, and vitamin B supplements. Nothing called Halo whatever." She was good. She was very, very good. She looked me straight in the eye and lied without a single tell, without a moment's hesitation. If I hadn't found that pill bottle, if I hadn't done my research, I would have believed her completely. I would have thought I was confused again, that I'd misunderstood something, that my deteriorating mind was creating false memories and paranoid delusions. "You're right," I said finally, squeezing her hand. "I must have mixed something up. These medication names all sound the same to me." She smiled with relief. "It's okay, Aunt Elle. That's why you have me. I'll always take care of you, no matter what." That night, lying in the spare bedroom that had become my prison, I stared at the ceiling and made a decision. I was going to pretend. I was going to act exactly as confused and helpless as Kimberly wanted me to be. I was going to take whatever pills she gave me and then hide them instead of swallowing them. I was going to document everything, remember everything, record everything, and I was going to find out exactly what she was planning and why. Because there had to be more to this than just my house. The house was valuable, certainly, but Kimberly had always known she'd inherit it eventually. Why go to such elaborate lengths to make me seem incompetent now? Why the urgency, the deception, the systematic destruction of my mental faculties? The answer came 3 days later when I found the insurance policy. I'd been alone in the house, supposedly napping as I did every afternoon now, but actually searching through Kimberly's home office. I'd learned to move quietly, to put things back exactly as I found them, to leave no trace of my investigations. The policy was buried in a file labeled Personal Documents, and it took my breath away. Life insurance on Eleanor Vance, beneficiary Kimberly Ann Vance Morrison, face value $3 million. The policy had been taken out 7 months ago, right around the time my supposed symptoms had started. The premium was astronomical, over $15,000 a year, but the payout would make it worthwhile, especially if the insured person were to die soon, perhaps from the kind of accident that often befalls elderly people with dementia. I photographed the policy with my cell phone, then carefully returned it to the file. My hands were shaking again, but this time with rage rather than fear. $3 million. That's what my life was worth to the little girl I'd raised, the child I'd sacrificed for, the woman I'd loved like a daughter. Add that to the $1.4 million for the house, and whatever was in my retirement accounts and investment portfolios, and Kimberly was looking at inheriting close to $5 million. No wonder she'd been so patient, so caring, so devoted. She wasn't taking care of me out of love. She was protecting her investment. But there was still something I didn't understand. The insurance policy had been issued 7 months ago, which meant it was past the usual contestability period. Kimberly could have arranged a fatal accident weeks ago if she'd wanted to. So why was she still going through the elaborate charade of drugging me and documenting my decline? Why the power of attorney? Why the house sale? Why the ongoing performance of devoted caretaker? I needed to find out, which meant I needed to keep playing my role as the confused, helpless aunt who couldn't manage her own life anymore. That Sunday, Marcus's mother Dorothy came for dinner, and I got my first real clue about what was happening. Dorothy was 73, sharp as a tack, and had never particularly liked me. She'd always felt that Marcus had married beneath him when he chose Kimberly, and she'd made it clear over the years that she found it distasteful how much time and attention Kimberly devoted to her aunt instead of focusing entirely on her husband and his family. So I was surprised when she pulled me aside after dinner, her thin fingers gripping my arm with unexpected strength, and whispered, "You need to be careful, Eleanor. Very careful." I looked at her in surprise, trying to determine if this was some kind of trap. "Careful about what, Dorothy?" She glanced toward the kitchen where Kimberly and Marcus were loading the dishwasher, then leaned closer. "About signing anything else. About giving her any more control. I've seen this before, with my own aunt. Family members who get power of attorney, who control the money, who make all the decisions. Things can go very wrong very quickly, especially if there's an inheritance involved." She released my arm and stepped back, her expression bitter. "Marcus won't listen to me. He thinks his wife is a saint. But I've watched her spending money you haven't given her yet, planning renovations for a house she doesn't own, acting like you're already dead. It's not right." Before I could respond, Kimberly appeared in the doorway, her smile bright, but her eyes cold. "What are you two talking about so seriously?" Dorothy immediately transformed, her expression smoothing into bland pleasantness. "Just reminiscing about old times. Eleanor and I don't get many chances to chat these days." Kimberly came over and took my arm, gently but firmly steering me away from her mother-in-law. "Well, I think Aunt Elle needs to rest now. She gets so tired after dinner, don't you, sweetie?" I nodded obediently, playing my part. But as Kimberly led me back to my bedroom, I caught Dorothy watching us with an expression of deep concern and something else. Guilt, perhaps, or regret that she hadn't spoken up sooner. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the dark thinking about everything I'd discovered, everything I'd figured out, everything I still needed to know. The medication designed to make me appear incompetent. The life insurance policy worth $3 million. The power of attorney that gave Kimberly control over all my assets. The house sale that was supposedly for my own good, but would really just line her pockets. And now, Dorothy's warning about signing anything else. What else was there to sign? What other legal documents was Kimberly planning to have me execute while I was supposedly too confused to understand what I was doing? The answer hit me with horrifying clarity around 3 a.m. And when I was still lying awake in the dark, a will. She was going to have me change my will, or possibly she already had. My current will, which James and I had drawn up together years ago, left everything to several charities with a modest trust for Kimberly. But if I died without updating it after my supposed Alzheimer's diagnosis, those charitable bequests might be contested. Better to have a new will, drafted while I was under her power of attorney, that left everything directly to her. Clean, simple, legally solid. And if I died soon afterward from some tragic accident, well, the will would stand because it had been properly executed by my legal guardian acting in my best interests. The next morning, when Kimberly brought me my smoothie as she did every morning, I pretended to drink it enthusiastically while actually pouring most of it into the large potted plant next to my chair when she wasn't looking. I'd been doing this for 3 days now, and already I could feel my mind clearing, the fog lifting, my memories becoming sharper and more reliable. The plant was probably dying from whatever drugs were in that smoothie, but I needed to stay alert, needed to keep thinking clearly if I was going to figure out how to stop her. Because one thing had become absolutely certain. Kimberly wasn't just stealing from me. She was planning to kill me, and probably sooner rather than later. The proof came that afternoon when I overheard a phone conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. I'd been in my room, supposedly napping, but I'd left the door cracked open slightly. I heard Kimberly come upstairs talking on her cell phone, and her voice carried clearly down the hallway. No, she's still signing everything I put in front of her. The new will goes to the attorney tomorrow, and he'll have her executed by end of week. After that, we just need to wait the standard 30 days to make sure it's not contested, and then we can move forward with phase 2. A pause while she listened to whoever was on the other end. Yes, I know it's taking longer than we planned, but it has to look natural. A fall down the stairs maybe, or she wanders out at night and gets hit by a car, something that fits the pattern of dementia behavior. My blood turned to ice water in my veins. She was openly discussing my murder as if she were planning a vacation. I pressed my hand against my mouth to keep from gasping, from crying out, from screaming. She was talking about killing me in 30 days, maybe less. 30 days after I signed the new will that would make her rich. 30 days was all the life I had left, unless I did something to stop her. Trust me, Kimberly continued, her voice moving toward her bedroom. By Thanksgiving, this will all be over. We'll be grieving, devastated, inconsolable, and $5 million richer. Marcus has everything planned down to the funeral arrangements. Marcus, her husband, was in on it too. Of course he was. They needed the money for something, needed it badly enough to murder me for it. I waited until I heard her bedroom door close, then quietly got out of bed and crept down the hallway. I needed evidence, needed proof, needed something I could take to the police that would make them believe me. Because right now, I was just a confused old woman with Alzheimer's making paranoid accusations against her devoted caretaker. No one would believe me. I needed documentation, recordings, something concrete. That's when I found the notebook in Marcus's home office, tucked into his desk drawer under a stack of financial documents. It was a detailed timeline of what they called the Aunt L project, and reading it made me physically ill. Every incident of confusion, every documented memory lapse, every piece of evidence of my supposed dementia was right there in Marcus's neat handwriting with dates, times, and notes about witnesses. March 15th, left stove on overnight, documented by fire department response. March 22nd, couldn't find car in parking lot, had to call Kim for help. Store manager witnessed confusion. April 3rd, called Kim at 3 a.m., thinking she was her mother Diane, very disoriented, recorded conversation. They'd been recording me. They'd been documenting everything. They'd been building a legal case that I was mentally incompetent, and they'd been doing it for 7 months with methodical precision. But it was the last entry that truly terrified me. October 15th, new will signed and filed. November 20th, implement final solution. Make it look like wandering episode. Hypothermia possible. Needs to appear accidental and consistent with dementia behavior. Insurance payout, plus estate settlement projected by February. House sale should close by March. Total profit estimated at $4.8 million after taxes and expenses. November 20th. That was exactly 30 days from the date of the projected will signing. Exactly 30 days for the will to become legally sound. And exactly 37 days from today. I had 37 days to live unless I found a way to stop them. I took photos of every page in that notebook with my cell phone, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold it steady. Then I carefully returned everything exactly as I'd found it and went back to my room. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the photos on my phone, and tried to think clearly through the rage and terror that threatened to overwhelm me. I had evidence now. Real evidence, but would it be enough? Would anyone believe me? Or would Kimberly and Marcus simply claim that I'd fabricated everything in a paranoid delusion brought on by my dementia? I needed help. I needed someone who would believe me, someone who would listen, someone who could help me build a case strong enough to stop them before November 20th. And I needed to be very, very careful, because now I understood exactly what I was dealing with. Not just greed, though that was certainly part of it. This was premeditated murder, meticulously planned and patiently executed. Kimberly and Marcus had spent 7 months destroying my reputation, my credibility, and my mind. They weren't going to give up now just because I'd discovered their plan. If anything, finding out that I knew would probably accelerate their timeline. I needed to act fast, but I needed to act smart. The answer came to me that evening when I saw a news report about elder abuse and financial exploitation on the television in the common room. The reporter mentioned something called Adult Protective Services, a government agency that investigated abuse of vulnerable adults. They had investigators, lawyers, access to medical experts who could determine if someone was really suffering from dementia or if their symptoms were artificially induced. They had the authority to file criminal charges, to freeze assets, to remove people from dangerous situations. This was what I needed. This was how I could fight back. But I couldn't call them from Kimberly's house. The phone records would show up. I couldn't use my cell phone because Kimberly had insisted on paying for my plan, which meant she probably had access to my call logs. I needed to get out of the house, get to somewhere safe, and make that call without Kimberly knowing, which meant I needed to plan an escape. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was 67 years old, a retired school principal with a supposed cognitive disability, and I was planning a prison break from my own niece's house. The opportunity came 3 days later when Kimberly had a mandatory sales conference that would keep her away overnight. Marcus would be home, of course, but he typically worked late at his office and didn't get home until after 8 p.m. That would give me several hours alone in the house, several hours to implement my escape plan. I'd been careful over the past few days to seem even more confused than usual, to make them believe their medication was working perfectly, to be the helpless, addled old woman they wanted me to be. I shuffled when I walked. I asked the same questions multiple times. I stared blankly at the television for hours. I was the perfect picture of advancing dementia. The morning Kimberly left, she gave me detailed instructions that I pretended not to fully understand. Now, Aunt Elle, Marcus will be home late tonight, so I've left you a frozen dinner in the fridge. All you have to do is put it in the microwave for 4 minutes. Can you remember that? 4 minutes? I nodded vaguely, and she sighed with patient martyrdom. I've also left your evening medications on the counter in a little cup. Take them at 6 p.m., okay? Not before, not after. 6 p.m. I nodded again. She kissed my cheek, and I smelled her expensive perfume. I'll call you tonight to check in. Be good, okay? The moment her car pulled out of the driveway, I dropped the act. I went to my room and pulled out the small bag I'd been packing secretly over the past 2 days. A change of clothes, my cell phone, my wallet with credit cards and my driver's license, the photos on my phone of all the evidence, and the one thing I'd managed to hide from Kimberly, a small amount of cash I'd withdrawn before moving in with her. It wasn't much, maybe $300, but it was enough to get me somewhere safe. I changed into comfortable shoes, put on a jacket, and walked out the front door of Kimberly's house for the last time. If you've ever trusted someone completely, only to discover they were lying to you the whole time, I want you to know you're not alone. Share your story in the comments below, because speaking up is the first step to healing. And if you want to know how this ends, hit that subscribe button right now, because what happens next will shock you. The public library on Commonwealth Avenue had been my sanctuary for 40 years, and walking through those familiar glass doors felt like coming home after a long exile. The elderly librarian at the front desk, a woman named Patricia, whom I'd known since she was a new hire in the 90s, looked up and her eyes widened with recognition and then concern. "Eleanor? My God, we heard you were ill. We heard you had—" She trailed off, unwilling to say the word Alzheimer's out loud, as if speaking it might somehow make it more real. "I've been better, Patricia," I said, my voice steadier than I'd expected. "But I need your help. I need to use a computer that can't be traced back to me, and I need to make some phone calls from a line that isn't connected to my family. Can you help me with that?" She studied my face for a long moment, and I watched her making calculations, weighing what she knew about me against what she'd heard. Finally, she nodded slowly. "The reference computers in the back don't require a library card login for basic internet access, and there's a payphone outside, one of the last ones left in the city. Will that work?" I wanted to hug her, but I settled for squeezing her hand. "Thank you. You have no idea how much this means." She squeezed back, and I saw belief in her eyes, trust in the woman I'd been before Kimberly started poisoning me. "Eleanor, I've known you for decades. Whatever's happening, whatever you need to do, I believe you're still the sharpest woman I've ever met. Don't let anyone tell you different. I spent the next 2 hours researching elder abuse, financial exploitation, and something I'd never heard of before, undue influence. It was a legal term that described situations where someone in a position of trust manipulated a vulnerable person into making financial or legal decisions they wouldn't normally make. It was exactly what Kimberly had been doing to me for 7 months, and it was exactly what I needed to prove to Adult Protective Services. I took careful notes on a borrowed pad of paper, documenting everything I'd need to report: the medication fraud, the fake dementia symptoms, the forged medical documentation, the insurance policy, the timeline in Marcus's notebook, the overheard phone conversation about my planned murder. But as I read through case after case of elder abuse prosecutions, my hope began to dim. The evidence requirements were stringent. I'd need medical proof that I wasn't actually suffering from dementia, which meant getting evaluated by an independent doctor who hadn't been influenced by Kimberly. I'd need forensic analysis of the medications I'd been given, but I'd dumped most of them into that plant or down the toilet. I'd need testimony from witnesses, but everyone who'd seen my confused behavior had been carefully selected by Kimberly to document her version of events. And most damning of all, I'd need to prove I was mentally competent to make accusations, which would be nearly impossible, given that I'd already been diagnosed with Alzheimer's by Dr. Patterson and had signed a power of attorney acknowledging my own incompetence. The legal system I'd trusted my entire life suddenly seemed like a trap designed to protect exactly the kind of predators I was trying to escape. Every protective mechanism that should have shielded me instead made me more vulnerable because they all assumed that the family caretaker had the elderly person's best interests at heart. What happened when the caretaker was the threat? What happened when the person everyone thought they were protecting me from was actually me? I made the call to Adult Protective Services from the payphone outside the library at 4:30 p.m., feeding quarters into the slot with shaking hands. A woman named Jennifer Kowalski answered after 3 rings, her voice professionally sympathetic. Adult Protective Services, this is Jennifer. How can I help you today? I took a deep breath and told her everything. I spoke for 20 minutes straight, describing the medication fraud, the fake diagnosis, the murder plot, the insurance policy, every detail I'd discovered. She listened without interrupting, and when I finally finished, there was a long pause. Ms. Vance, she said carefully, these are very serious allegations. If what you're saying is true, we absolutely need to investigate, but I have to ask you some questions first, okay? My stomach clenched. Of course. Have you been diagnosed with any cognitive impairment? Dementia? Alzheimer's? Anything like that? Yes, but the diagnosis was false. That's what I've been trying to explain. They made me seem confused by drugging me. Another pause, longer this time. And do you have any proof of this medication fraud? Pill bottles, prescription records, anything we can test? I thought of that haloperidol bottle I'd found in the trash, which I'd left there because I hadn't known then what I was dealing with. No, but I have photos of documents showing their plan to kill me. Okay, and where are these documents now? In my niece's house, in her husband's office. So you don't have the physical documents, just photos you took with your phone? Yes, but they're real. I can show you. Ms. Vance, Jennifer interrupted gently, and I heard it in her voice then, the subtle shift from belief to skepticism. I want you to know that we take all reports seriously, but I also need to be honest with you. What you're describing sounds like it could be a case of paranoid delusions, which is very common in people with dementia. The belief that family members are stealing from them, that medication is actually poison, that there's a conspiracy to harm them. These are textbook symptoms. I felt something break inside my chest. I'm not delusional. I'm not paranoid. My niece is planning to murder me on November 20th, and if you don't help me, I'm going to die. I understand you're scared, Jennifer said, her voice infuriatingly patient. What I'd like to do is send someone to do a welfare check, to make sure you're safe and that your living situation is appropriate. Can you tell me where you're staying right now? That's when I understood. If I told her where I was, she'd contact Kimberly. She'd tell my devoted caretaker that I'd run away, that I was making wild accusations, that I was clearly in crisis. And Kimberly would come get me, take me back to her house, and accelerate the timeline because now I'd proven I was a flight risk. November 20th would become November 1st, maybe even October 26th. I'd be dead within days, and everyone would say how tragic it was that I'd become so paranoid at the end, how hard Kimberly had tried to care for me, how dementia was such a cruel disease. I can't tell you that, I said, because if I do, you'll tell her, and she'll kill me sooner. Ms. Vance, I really think... I hung up. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the receiver to return it to the cradle. I'd called the one agency that was supposed to protect people like me, and they thought I was crazy. They thought I was exactly what Kimberly had spent 7 months making me appear to be, a paranoid, delusional old woman who couldn't distinguish reality from imagination. I stood outside that library as the October sun began to set, and for the first time since I'd found that pill bottle, I felt truly helpless. I had evidence, but it wasn't enough. I had proof, but no one would believe me. I had 37 days to live, and nowhere to turn for help. The system designed to protect me had failed before I'd even gotten through the door, because Kimberly had done her job too well. She'd spent 7 months establishing a paper trail, building a legal case, creating a documented history of my incompetence, and I'd let her do it because I'd trusted her, because I'd loved her, because I'd been too busy being confused to realize I was being murdered one smoothie at a time. That's when my phone rang. I looked at the screen and saw Kimberly's name, her smiling face in the contact photo mocking me. I almost didn't answer, but then I realized that not answering would alert her that something was wrong. So I took a breath, forced my voice to sound addled and uncertain, and said hello. Aunt Elle? Where are you? Her voice was tight with barely controlled panic. I came home early from my conference and you're not here. The house is empty. Where did you go? I let my words slur slightly, let confusion bleed into my tone. I went for a walk. I wanted to see the library. The library? Aunt Elle? That's 3 miles from the house. How did you even get there? I walked. My legs still work, Kimberly. A long pause, and I could almost hear her mind working, calculating whether this was genuine confusion or something more dangerous. Okay, that's fine. But it's getting dark and you need to come home now. Where exactly are you? I'm at the library, on Commonwealth. Stay right there. Don't move. Don't go anywhere. Marcus is coming to get you right now, okay? Just wait in front of the building where he can see you. She hung up before I could respond, and I stood there staring at my phone, realizing I'd just made a terrible mistake. By telling her where I was, by answering her call, I'd given away my location. And Marcus was coming, probably already in his car, probably already speeding toward Commonwealth Avenue to collect his confused, wandering, demented aunt-in-law before she could talk to anyone else or cause any more problems. I looked around desperately, trying to think. The library closed at 6 p.m., which was 15 minutes away. I had maybe 20 minutes before Marcus arrived, maybe 30 if traffic was bad. I could run, but where would I go? I had $300 in cash, no credit cards I could use without Kimberly tracking them, and nowhere to stay that she wouldn't eventually find me. I could go to the police, but what would I tell them? That my niece was drugging me, planning to kill me, and I had photos on my phone as proof? They'd take one look at me, call Kimberly, and hand me right back over to her custody because she had legal power of attorney over my medical and financial decisions. The only thing I had going for me was that Kimberly didn't know yet how much I'd figured out. She thought I was genuinely confused, that I'd wandered away in a moment of disorientation, not that I'd escaped with evidence and a plan. If I could keep her believing that, if I could continue playing the role of the helpless dementia patient, maybe I'd buy myself more time to find real help. So I waited outside the library, shivering in the cooling October air, and when Marcus's BMW pulled up to the curb 20 minutes later, I made myself look small and scared and lost. Eleanor, he said, getting out of the car with his lawyer's smile, all professional concern. You gave us quite a scare. Kimberly was worried sick when she came home and found you gone. I let my eyes well up with tears, let my voice shake. I got confused. I thought I still worked at the library. I thought I needed to return some books. He helped me into the car with exaggerated gentleness, his hand on my elbow like I might shatter. It's okay. These things happen. But you need to stay close to home from now on, okay? It's not safe for you to wander around the city alone. The drive back to their house took 15 minutes, and Marcus spent the entire time talking to me like I was a child, explaining that they were only trying to keep me safe, that they loved me, that they wanted what was best for me. I nodded along, made agreeable noises, and watched his face in the rearview mirror. This was the man who'd written "Implement Final Solution" in his notebook. This was the man who'd planned my murder with the same careful attention he probably used to prepare trial strategy. And he was telling me they loved me while driving me back to the place where they were slowly erasing my existence. Kimberly was waiting when we arrived, and she rushed out to embrace me with Oscar-worthy emotion. "Aunt Elle, thank God you're safe. I was so scared." "You can't just leave like that without telling anyone. What if something had happened to you?" I apologized profusely, played my role perfectly, let her lead me inside like a wayward child. But as she helped me to my room and insisted I rest after my ordeal, I saw something new in her eyes. Suspicion. She'd bought my act, but only barely. She was watching me more carefully now, calculating whether I was really as confused as I seemed, or if I was playing some kind of game. That night, after she brought me my evening medications in the little cup, I pretended to take them, but actually hid them under my tongue until she left. Then I spit them into a tissue and examined them carefully. There were 4 pills. 1 I recognized as a common sleeping medication, 2 I didn't recognize at all, and 1 that I was almost certain was the haloperidol that had been clouding my mind for months. I wrapped them carefully in the tissue and hid them in the pocket of a jacket in my closet. Evidence. Finally, tangible evidence I could have analyzed if I ever got out of this house again. But getting out seemed less likely with each passing hour. The next morning, I discovered that the locks on all the exterior doors had been changed to the kind that required keys on both sides. I couldn't leave without Kimberly or Marcus unlocking the door for me. The windows had new locks, too, small but effective, the kind advertised for child safety but clearly installed to keep me trapped. My prison cell had gotten smaller overnight, and my wardens were watching me with increasing vigilance. Over the following days, I maintained my act of confused compliance while secretly trying to find a way out. I looked for spare keys, but they were kept on Kimberly and Marcus at all times. I considered breaking a window, but they were double-paned and would make too much noise. I thought about calling 911, but my cell phone had mysteriously disappeared from my room, and the house phone had been removed entirely. They'd thought of everything. They'd turned their home into a prison so subtle that no one visiting would notice, but so complete that I had no way to escape. The only time I left the house was for my doctor's appointment with Dr. Patterson, which Kimberly insisted on attending. I'd hoped to speak with him privately, to explain what was happening, to beg for help. But Kimberly never left my side for a moment, and Dr. Patterson directed all his questions through her rather than to me. How has she been doing with her medications? Any new episodes of confusion? Is she sleeping through the night? Kimberly answered everything with perfect concern, painting a picture of a devoted caretaker managing a difficult situation with grace and patience. When he finally examined me, asking me basic questions to assess my cognitive state, I considered telling him the truth. But Kimberly was right there, her hand on my shoulder, and I saw the notebook Dr. Patterson kept consulting, filled with notes about my supposed decline. 7 months of documented dementia symptoms, all carefully recorded and officially witnessed. If I contradicted that now, if I suddenly claimed to be lucid and competent, would he believe me? Or would he just note that I was having a moment of clarity, which was common in dementia patients, and then recommend even more medication to manage my agitation? I kept quiet. I answered his questions with appropriate confusion. And I watched Kimberly smile with satisfaction as Dr. Patterson wrote out new prescriptions for medications I would never actually take. But as we left his office, walking through the busy medical building filled with people who had no idea they were watching a murder in slow motion, I felt my hope dying. Time was running out. November 20th was getting closer with every day that passed, and I was no closer to escape than I'd been when I first discovered their plan. The breaking point came on October 28th, exactly 23 days before my scheduled death. I was in my room, supposedly napping, when I heard Kimberly and Marcus arguing downstairs. Their voices carried up through the old heating vents, and I pressed my ear to the grate to hear better. "She knows something," Kimberly was saying, her voice sharp with stress. "The way she looks at me sometimes, the way she watches us. She's playing dumb, but I don't think she's as confused as she wants us to believe." "You're paranoid," Marcus replied, but he didn't sound entirely convinced. "She called Adult Protective Services last week," Kimberly continued. I have a friend who works there, and she called to give me a heads up. Said some confused old lady named Eleanor Vance had called in, making wild accusations about being drugged and murdered. They did a file check, saw she had a dementia diagnosis and a legal guardian, and closed the case as unfounded. But Eleanor made that call, which means she's been lucid enough to figure out at least some of what's happening. My blood turned cold. They knew. They knew I'd called APS, which meant they knew I'd escaped the house, which meant they knew I was aware enough to seek help. My cover was blown, and I was locked in their house with no way out and no one coming to save me. "So, what do you want to do?" Marcus asked. "We can't move up the timeline too much or it'll look suspicious." There was a long silence, and when Kimberly spoke again, her voice was flat and decided. "We don't have a choice anymore. She's a liability now. It has to happen soon, within the next week. I'll talk to our contact about moving up the schedule. We'll make it look like she had a bad reaction to her medication, went outside confused, and fell down the back steps. Head injury, internal bleeding, too old and fragile to survive, tragic but completely consistent with her condition. Within the next week. That meant I had days, not weeks. Maybe less than that. They were going to kill me, probably while I was sleeping, probably by giving me an overdose of something and then staging a fall down the back steps that led from their deck to the yard below. It would look exactly like what it was supposed to, a confused elderly woman with dementia having a fatal accident. No one would question it. No one would investigate. And Kimberly would collect her $5 million, crying beautifully at my funeral, accepting condolences from people who thought she'd been a saint to care for me in my final days. I sat on my bed that night, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I let myself cry. Not quiet tears, but deep, wrenching sobs that shook my whole body. I'd spent 50 years being strong, being capable, being the person everyone else leaned on. I'd raised a child who wasn't mine. I'd buried a husband I loved. I'd built a career helping children who had no one else. And this was how it ended. Locked in a room, drugged into compliance, waiting to be murdered by the girl I'd sacrificed everything to save. But somewhere in the middle of that crying, something shifted inside me. I thought about all those children I'd helped over 3 decades as a principal. The kids who came from broken homes, abusive parents, impossible situations. The ones everyone said were lost causes, too damaged, too far gone. And I remembered what I used to tell them, my voice firm but kind. You're not helpless. You're not powerless. You might not see the way out yet, but that doesn't mean there isn't one. And as long as you're still breathing, you can still fight. I was still breathing, which meant I could still fight. I need you to understand something important right now. If you or someone you love is being abused by a family member, isolated, controlled, or made to feel crazy, you are not imagining it. Your instincts are right, and you deserve help, even when the system fails you. Drop a comment if this story is hitting too close to home, because you're not alone in this. And keep watching, because what Eleanor does next will prove that being underestimated is sometimes the greatest advantage you can have. I spent the next 2 days in careful observation, watching Kimberly and Marcus's patterns, noting when they were most distracted, identifying any gaps in their surveillance. They'd gotten comfortable with their prison, confident in their locks and their control. But every prison has a weakness. I just needed to find it. The weakness turned out to be their arrogance. They'd locked me in so thoroughly that they'd stopped watching me quite as carefully. Kimberly still brought me my medications 3 times a day, but she no longer stood there to watch me swallow them. Marcus still checked the locks every night, but he'd stopped looking in on me after midnight. They thought I was beaten. They thought I'd given up, and that complacency was going to be my way out. On October 30th, I found my opportunity. Kimberly had a mandatory evening meeting with her sales team, and Marcus had a late court appearance that would keep him downtown until at least 9 p.m. For the first time in weeks, I would be completely alone in the house for several hours. But the doors were still locked. The windows still secured. I needed another way out. That's when I remembered the basement. Their house was old, built in the 1920s, and like most houses of that era, it had a coal chute, a small opening in the foundation that had once been used to deliver coal directly into the basement. I'd noticed it months ago when I'd first moved in, boarded up, but still visible from inside. If I could remove those boards, if I could fit through that opening, I could escape without triggering any of the door or window locks. I waited until I heard Kimberly's car pull out of the driveway, confirmed through the window that Marcus's BMW was gone too. Then I went to work. The basement was dark and musty, filled with storage boxes and forgotten furniture. The coal chute was in the far corner, behind a wall of plastic storage containers that I had to move one by one. The boards covering it were old but still solid, nailed in place decades ago. I needed tools, something to pry them loose. In Marcus's workbench, I found a crowbar and a claw hammer. My hands, which had been so shaky and uncertain for months, felt steady now, clear. I wedged the crowbar under the first board and pulled with all the strength my 67-year-old body could muster. It groaned, protested, then gave way with a sharp crack that echoed through the basement. I froze, listening for any sound that might indicate someone was home, that I'd been wrong about being alone. But there was only silence. I pried off the second board, then the third. The opening behind them was small, maybe 2 feet square, angled up toward ground level. I could see October twilight through the gap, could smell fresh air and freedom, but I wasn't sure I could fit through it. I was thin, had lost weight over the months of stress and poor appetite, but the opening looked impossibly narrow. Still, this was my only chance. If I didn't take it now, by this time next week I'd be dead. I pushed my bag through first, the one I'd packed days ago and kept hidden in my closet. Then I maneuvered myself into position, head first through the opening, using my arms to pull myself up and out. The concrete scraped my shoulders, caught on my clothes, held me suspended between basement and ground level for one terrifying moment where I thought I might be stuck, trapped half in and half out like some nightmare scenario. But then something gave. My jacket tore, and I pulled myself free into the backyard. I lay on the cold grass for a moment, breathing hard, my body aching from the effort. Then I heard a car door slam from the front of the house. Someone was home early. Either Kimberly or Marcus had come back, and any second now they'd discover I was missing. I grabbed my bag and ran, not toward the street where they might see me, but through the back neighbor's yard, then another, putting distance between myself and that house as quickly as my old legs would carry me. I was 3 blocks away when I heard Kimberly screaming my name. The sound carried through the quiet neighborhood, desperate and furious and afraid. Not afraid for me, I knew now. Afraid of me. Afraid of what I might do, what I might say, who I might tell. She'd lost control of her victim, and that meant her entire plan was falling apart. I kept running into the darkness, with no destination in mind except away. Away from Kimberly. Away from Marcus. Away from that house where they'd planned my murder. I had no phone, no way to call for help, no proof anyone would believe. But I was free, and as long as I stayed free, as long as I stayed alive, there was still a chance I could stop them. I just had to figure out how. I spent that first night of freedom in a 24-hour diner on the outskirts of the city, nursing coffee I couldn't afford to keep buying and trying to figure out what to do next. The waitress, a tired-looking woman in her 50s with kind eyes and orthopedic shoes, kept refilling my cup without comment. Around 3 a.m., when the diner was empty except for us and one trucker at the counter, she finally spoke. "You running from someone, honey?" she asked quietly, refilling my cup for the 6th time. I looked up at her, and something in her face, the absence of judgment, the weariness that comes from seeing too much of life's ugly side, made me tell the truth. Yes, my niece and her husband, they're trying to kill me for my inheritance. I expected skepticism, pity, maybe even a suggestion that I call someone to come get me. Instead, she nodded slowly and sat down across from me. My mother went through something similar. Not murder, but my brother convinced her to sign everything over to him, told her she was losing her mind, isolated her from everyone who might have helped. By the time I figured out what was happening, she'd been legally declared incompetent, and he had full control. She died 6 months later in a nursing home she never wanted to be in, and he sold her house before she was even buried. She paused, her fingers wrapped around her own coffee cup. "So I believe you. Question is, what are you going to do about it?" "I don't know," I admitted, and it felt good to say it out loud, to acknowledge my complete lack of a plan. I have evidence, but it's not enough. I have photos on a phone I don't have anymore. I have pills I hid that might prove they were drugging me, but they're back in that house. I called the Protective Services Agency and they thought I was delusional. I have 37 days, no, less than that now, maybe a week before they find me and finish what they started. And I have nowhere to go and no one who'll believe me. The waitress, whose name tag read Diane in faded letters, was quiet for a long moment. Then she pulled a cell phone from her apron pocket and slid it across the table to me. My daughter's a lawyer, not the fancy kind that works in glass towers downtown, the kind that actually helps people. She handles elder abuse cases, takes on guardianship disputes, fights for people the system has forgotten about. Her name is Rachel Brennan, and I'm going to call her right now and tell her she needs to meet with you. Today, this morning, before your niece figures out where you are. I stared at the phone, then at Diane, feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. Real hope. Not the desperate fantasy kind, but the solid possibility that maybe, just maybe, I'd found someone who could actually help me. Why would you do this for a stranger? I asked. Because nobody did it for my mother, Diane said simply. And because I'm tired of watching families destroy each other for money while the rest of us pretend not to see it happening. Rachel Brennan arrived at the diner at 8:30 a.m. I'm still in her running clothes with her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, looking nothing like the lawyers I'd dealt with in my life. She was maybe 40, with her mother's kind eyes and a no-nonsense directness that reminded me of myself before Kimberly started erasing me. She slid into the booth across from me, ordered coffee from her mother, and pulled out a yellow legal pad. "Tell me everything," she said. "Start from the beginning. Leave nothing out, and don't worry about whether I'll believe you. My job is to believe the things no one else wants to hear." So I told her. Every detail, every piece of evidence, every moment of horror and betrayal. I told her about the haloperidol, about the fake dementia diagnosis, about the insurance policy and the timeline and the overheard conversation about my murder. I told her about escaping through the coal chute, about Adult Protective Services dismissing my call, about the systematic way Kimberly and Marcus had built a legal framework around my supposed incompetence. I talked for 90 minutes straight, while Rachel filled page after page with notes, stopping me occasionally to ask clarifying questions, but never once looking at me with doubt or pity. When I finished, she set down her pen and looked at me directly. "Eleanor, I'm going to be honest with you about what we're facing here. Your niece and her husband have done a very thorough job of establishing legal guardianship and documenting your supposed cognitive decline. The power of attorney you signed, the medical diagnosis from Dr. Patterson, the witnessed incidents of confusion, all of that creates a legal presumption that they're acting in your best interests. Breaking that presumption is going to be difficult, expensive, and time-consuming." My heart sank. This was going to be another dead end. Another person who believed me, but couldn't help me. Another day closer to November 20th or whatever accelerated date they'd chosen for my murder. But Rachel wasn't finished. "However," she continued, "Massachusetts has something called an emergency guardianship hearing. If I can convince a judge that you're in immediate danger, that your current guardian is acting against your interests, and that there's credible evidence of abuse, I can get a temporary restraining order and an emergency psychiatric evaluation within 48 hours. The evaluation will be conducted by an independent doctor, not someone connected to your niece, and it will include blood work that can detect the presence of antipsychotic medications in your system. If we can prove you were drugged, if we can prove you're not actually suffering from dementia, we can invalidate the power of attorney and strip them of legal guardianship. Can you do all that in 48 hours? I asked, barely daring to hope. "I can try, but I need you to understand something. The moment I file these papers, the moment this becomes official, Kimberly and Marcus are going to know exactly where you are. The court will notify them of the emergency hearing, and they'll show up with their own lawyers, probably expensive ones, probably with prepared testimony about your paranoid delusions and your history of confusion. They're going to fight hard because they're fighting for $5 million. And if we lose, if the judge sides with them, you'll be remanded back into their custody and I won't be able to protect you." I thought about that house with its locked doors and barred windows, about the timeline in Marcus's notebook, about Kimberly's voice discussing my murder as casually as she might plan a dinner party. If I went back there after trying to expose them, after fighting them in court and losing, I wouldn't last 24 hours. They'd make it look like suicide, probably, a confused dementia patient who couldn't handle the stress of legal proceedings and ended her own life in a moment of clarity about what her future held. "Then we can't lose," I said simply. Rachel smiled, and it was fierce. "Then let's make sure we don't." The next 48 hours were the most intense of my life. Rachel got me into a safe house run by a women's shelter that specialized in elder abuse cases, a small apartment in a secure building where Kimberly couldn't find me. Then she went to work with the focused intensity of someone who'd been fighting these battles for years. She filed emergency petitions, requested blood tests, subpoenaed medical records, and tracked down every piece of documentary evidence I'd described to her. She even sent an investigator to Kimberly's house with a warrant to search for the medications I'd described, though I suspected Kimberly had already destroyed them by now. But Rachel had something I didn't have: connections. She knew which judges took elder abuse seriously, which doctors were willing to testify about medication-induced cognitive symptoms, which social workers would advocate for a vulnerable senior against a seemingly devoted family member. She built a case in 48 hours that would normally take weeks or months, and she did it with the kind of righteous anger that comes from having watched her own grandmother suffer. The emergency hearing was scheduled for November 1st at 2 p.m. in Suffolk County Family Court. Rachel warned me that it would be brutal, that Kimberly and Marcus would be there with their legal team, that I'd have to testify in front of them and maintain my composure while they tried to paint me as delusional and paranoid. But she also told me that the judge, a woman named Judge Patricia Martinez, had a reputation for seeing through family manipulation and had ruled against several adult children in guardianship disputes. I wore the one decent outfit I'd managed to salvage from my escape, a simple navy dress that I'd bought for James's funeral years ago. Rachel met me outside the courtroom at 1:45, and I could see the tension in her shoulders. "They've brought a big firm," she said quietly. "Morrison, Torres and Associates. Very expensive, very aggressive, very good at what they do." Torres. The name hit me like ice water. "Did you say Torres?" "Yes. Why? Do you know them?" "I met someone at a charity function about 6 months ago, a woman named Miranda Torres. She was asking me a lot of questions about my estate planning, about my relationship with Kimberly." I grabbed Rachel's arm. "What if she's involved in this? What if they've been planning this with help from that law firm?" Rachel's expression went very still. "Miranda Torres is one of the senior partners at that firm. She specializes in estate planning and elder law." She pulled out her phone and started typing quickly. "I need to make some calls before we go in there. If they've been using a law firm to facilitate abuse, that changes everything." But there was no time. The bailiff called us into the courtroom, and suddenly we were walking into a space that felt more like a battlefield than a place of justice. Kimberly and Marcus sat at the defendant's table with 3 lawyers in expensive suits, and when Kimberly saw me, her face went through a series of expressions: shock, fear, fury, and finally a mask of concerned grief. She'd dressed carefully for this, I noticed. Conservative clothing, minimal makeup, tissue in hand. She looked like the devoted niece she'd pretended to be for 7 months. Judge Martinez was a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and sharp, intelligent eyes that took in every detail of the courtroom. She reviewed the emergency petition Rachel had filed, then looked up at both tables. "This is an emergency guardianship hearing regarding Eleanor Marie Vance. Ms. Brennan, you've filed on behalf of Ms. Vance requesting removal of current guardian Kimberly Vance Morrison and alleging abuse, exploitation, and immediate danger. That's a serious accusation. I hope you have evidence to support it." "We do, Your Honor," Rachel said, standing with the confident authority of someone who knew she was right. "We have blood work showing the presence of antipsychotic medication in Ms. Vance's system that was never prescribed by her doctor. We have an independent psychiatric evaluation completed yesterday showing no signs of dementia, Alzheimer's, or cognitive impairment. We have financial records showing a life insurance policy taken out on Ms. Vance without her knowledge or consent. And we have testimony from Ms. Vance herself about systematic drugging, false medical documentation, and an overheard plan to murder her for her inheritance." The lead lawyer for Kimberly and Marcus, a man with silver hair and a practiced smile, stood immediately. "Your Honor, what Ms. Brennan is describing are classic symptoms of paranoid delusions in dementia patients. Ms. Vance has a documented history of confusion, memory loss, and bizarre accusations. The blood work she mentions can be easily explained." "I'll hear the evidence before I hear your explanations, Counselor," Judge Martinez interrupted coolly. "Ms. Brennan, Call your first witness. Rachel called me to the stand. I walked up there on shaking legs, placed my hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. Then, I looked directly at Kimberly for the first time since entering that courtroom, and I told my truth. I described finding the haloperidol bottle. I described the smoothies laced with medication. I described the timeline in Marcus's notebook, the insurance policy, the overheard phone conversation about my murder. I described escaping through a coal chute like a prisoner, spending the night in a diner because I had no one else to turn to, the terror of knowing the people you loved most in the world wanted you dead. Kimberly's lawyer cross-examined me with surgical precision, trying to poke holes in my testimony, suggesting that I'd misunderstood things, that my memory was faulty, that my fear was driven by disease rather than reality. But Rachel had prepared me well, and I held firm. Yes, I remembered dates. Yes, I could describe events in detail. Yes, I understood exactly what I was accusing them of. And no, I wasn't confused about any of it. Then Rachel called Dr. Sarah Chen, the independent psychiatrist who'd evaluated me. Dr. Chen testified that I showed no signs of cognitive impairment, that my memory was excellent for someone my age, that my reasoning was clear and logical. She testified that the symptoms described in Dr. Patterson's notes were consistent with antipsychotic medication side effects rather than actual dementia, and she testified that the blood work definitively showed haloperidol in my system at levels consistent with daily dosing over an extended period. But I never prescribed that medication, Rachel said. Dr. Patterson never prescribed it. So where did it come from? The only explanation, Dr. Chen said calmly, is that someone was giving it to Ms. Vance without her knowledge or consent. Someone was drugging her to create the appearance of dementia. The courtroom went very quiet. Judge Martinez looked at Kimberly with an expression I couldn't read. Then she looked at Kimberly's lawyers. I'd like to hear from Ms. Vance Morrison. I'd like to hear her explain how medication her aunt was never prescribed ended up in her bloodstream. Kimberly took the stand with perfect composure. She explained that she'd been managing all of Aunt Eleanor's medications, that perhaps there had been a mix-up at the pharmacy, that she'd only been trying to help. She cried beautifully when describing how hard it had been to watch me deteriorate, how guilty she felt that maybe she'd made a mistake with the pills. She was convincing. She was sympathetic. She was everything a devoted caretaker should be. But then Rachel asked her one simple question. Ms. Vance Morrison, did you take out a $3 million life insurance policy on your aunt 7 months ago? Kimberly hesitated just for a second, and in that second, I saw her realize that we knew more than she'd thought. Yes, she said finally. I did. For her protection, to make sure her final expenses would be covered. $3 million to cover final expenses? That seems excessive. She has a valuable estate. I wanted to make sure everything was handled properly. And when were you planning to tell her about this policy? Another hesitation. When the time was right. When she was dead, you mean? Objection. Kimberly's lawyer was on his feet. Argumentative, Your Honor. But Judge Martinez waved him down. I'll allow it. Answer the question, Ms. Vance Morrison. Kimberly's mask was cracking. I could see it happening in real time, the careful composure dissolving under pressure. I was protecting her assets. That's what a guardian does. By drugging her? By making her seem incompetent? By planning her death? Rachel's voice was rising, controlled fury bleeding through her professional tone. Your Honor, I have one more piece of evidence I'd like to enter. It came to light this morning through an emergency subpoena. She handed documents to the judge, to Kimberly's lawyers, and to me. I looked down at the papers and felt my stomach clench. It was a second will, supposedly signed by me 3 weeks ago, leaving everything to Kimberly. But I'd never signed this document. I'd never even seen it before, and the signature, while close to mine, wasn't quite right. This is a forged will, Rachel said clearly. Prepared by the law firm Morrison, Torres & Associates, specifically by senior partner Miranda Torres, who has been investigated twice before for facilitating elder abuse. Mrs. Torres apparently specializes in helping families accelerate inheritances through false guardianships and forged documents. And she's been working with Ms. Vance Morrison and her husband for at least 7 months to systematically rob and potentially murder Ms. Eleanor Vance. The courtroom exploded. Kimberly's lawyers were shouting objections. Marcus stood up, his face pale. Kimberly just sat there, frozen, watching her entire plan collapse in front of her. and Judge Martinez banged her gavel with authority that cut through the chaos. "Enough," she said, and the room went silent. She looked at Kimberly, at Marcus, at their expensive lawyers, and her expression was carved from stone. "I'm granting the emergency petition. Guardianship is immediately revoked. Ms. Eleanor Vance is restored to full legal capacity and control of her assets. And I'm referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for criminal investigation of fraud, elder abuse, attempted murder, and conspiracy." She turned to me. "Ms. Vance, I apologize on behalf of this court that you had to experience this. No one should be victimized by the people they love most. You're free to go, and I'm issuing a restraining order preventing Ms. Vance Morrison and Mr. Morrison from coming within 500 feet of you." I sat there, unable to process what had just happened. I'd won. After months of being drugged, manipulated, imprisoned, and planned against, I'd actually won. Rachel was hugging me, crying, telling me we'd done it. But I couldn't take my eyes off Kimberly, who was sitting at the defendant's table with her head in her hands, her lawyers frantically packing up their files, her husband looking at her with dawning horror at what she'd dragged him into. "Why?" I asked, my voice cutting through the noise. Everyone turned to look at me. "Kimberly, I need to know why. I gave you everything. I raised you, loved you, supported you. I would have left you the money eventually. You didn't need to do this. So why?" She looked up at me, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I saw something real in her face. Not remorse exactly, but exhaustion. "Because eventually wasn't soon enough," she said quietly. "We needed the money now. Marcus has gambling debts you don't know about. I have a shopping addiction I can't control. We're drowning, Aunt Elle, and you were our only way out. And the longer you lived, the deeper we sank. So you decided to kill me. I decided to do what I had to do to survive." She stood up, and her lawyers tried to stop her, but she shook them off. "You don't understand what it's like to be almost 40 and broke and watching everyone around you live the life you deserve. You had James, you had money, you had stability. I've had nothing but struggle since my mother died, and you never understood that. You tried, I know you tried, but you never understood what it felt like to always be the charity case. Always be the one who needed help, always be less than. This was supposed to be my turn, my chance to finally have something of my own." I looked at this woman I'd raised, at the entitlement and bitterness and twisted logic that had led her to try to murder me, and I felt something shift inside my chest. Not forgiveness, I would never forgive this, but a kind of sad acceptance that the little girl I'd loved had become someone I didn't recognize, someone who'd made choices I couldn't understand or excuse. "You had something of your own," I said softly. "You had me, and you threw it away for money you didn't even need yet." That's when she started crying. Real tears this time. Not the performed grief she'd shown in the courtroom, but genuine anguish at what she'd done and what she'd lost. Marcus wouldn't look at either of us, and the lawyers were already distancing themselves, understanding that their clients were about to face serious criminal charges and that Miranda Torres's involvement meant this case was going to get much bigger, much uglier, and much more public than anyone wanted. If you're watching this and you've made it this far, I want you to know something. Betrayal by family cuts deeper than any other wound. It changes you in ways that never fully heal. But surviving it, fighting back, refusing to let them win, that changes you too. In better ways, in stronger ways. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that they're not crazy, they're not alone, and they deserve to fight for themselves. And thank you for listening to my story. The criminal trial took 18 months. Kimberly and Marcus both pleaded guilty to conspiracy, elder abuse, financial exploitation, and attempted fraud. Kimberly got 12 years. Marcus got 8. Miranda Torres and her law firm faced federal charges for running what prosecutors called a systematic operation targeting vulnerable seniors across Massachusetts. The investigation uncovered 16 other cases similar to mine. Families who'd used Torres's services to fast-track inheritances through false guardianships and forged documents. 3 of those cases involved suspicious deaths that were reopened as possible homicides. I testified at every trial, every hearing, every legal proceeding. I told my story dozens of times to judges, juries, prosecutors, and investigators. And each time I told it, I felt a little bit of the poison drain out of me. A little bit of the shame and confusion and self-doubt that Kimberly had planted in my mind, along with that haloperidol. I wasn't the crazy one. I wasn't the broken one. I was the survivor. The house in Brookline sold eventually, but not to fund Kimberly's lifestyle. I donated the proceeds to the women's shelter that had taken me in, to Rachel Brennan's legal aid organization, and to a new foundation I started called Sarah's House, named for Diane's mother and for all the other elderly people who don't survive their family's greed. Sarah's House provides emergency shelter, legal advocacy, and protective services for seniors experiencing financial abuse. We've helped over 200 people in the past year alone, and that number grows every month. I live in a small apartment now, not the colonial in Brookline where I raised Kimberly, but a place that's entirely mine, with locks only I have keys to and medications only I manage. I see Dr. Chen regularly, not because there's anything wrong with me, but because I need someone to remind me occasionally that I'm not the person Kimberly tried to make me believe I was. I'm sharp, capable, and fully in control of my faculties. The only thing I suffer from is the normal forgetfulness that comes with being 69 years old and having lived through trauma that would break someone half my age. I don't visit Kimberly in prison. She's written me letters, dozens of them, apologizing and explaining and asking for forgiveness. I read the first few, then stopped. There's nothing she can say that will undo what she did. No apology that will erase 7 months of systematic abuse and planned murder. Some betrayals are too deep to forgive, and I've made peace with that. I don't need to forgive her, to heal from her. I just need to keep living, keep fighting, keep helping other people who are where I was. Rachel has become my friend, my lawyer, and something like the daughter I thought I had in Kimberly. She still takes on impossible cases, still fights for people no one else believes in, still charges into courtrooms like a warrior defending the defenseless. We have lunch every Sunday, and she tells me about her cases while I tell her about the people we've helped at Sarah's house. It's not the family I expected to have at this stage of my life, but it's the family I've built, and it's real in ways my relationship with Kimberly never was. Diane from the diner comes to those lunches too sometimes, and we've formed a strange little tribe of women who've been touched by elder abuse in different ways. We don't talk about it constantly. We're not defined by our trauma, but we understand each other in ways that people who haven't been through it never will. We know what it's like to be betrayed by blood, to be dismissed by systems that should protect us, to have to fight for our own humanity when everyone around us says we're too old, too confused, too irrelevant to matter. I'm writing this down now, telling this story in full for the first time, because I want people to understand how easy it is for this to happen. I wasn't a foolish woman. I wasn't uneducated or uninformed or without resources. I was a retired school principal with a master's degree and a lifetime of experience dealing with difficult people and complicated situations. And I still almost died because I trusted family, because I loved too much, because I believed that blood meant something. It took me months to understand that the real lesson wasn't about trust. It was about paying attention to that voice in your head that says something's wrong, even when everyone around you insists you're confused. It was about believing yourself when the evidence doesn't match the story you're being told. It was about understanding that the most dangerous predators aren't strangers. They're the people who know exactly how to exploit your love, your guilt, and your fear of being alone. I think about what would have happened if I hadn't found that pill bottle, if I'd taken just one more day of medication before I realized what was happening. I think about November 20th, the date marked in Marcus's notebook as final solution, and I imagine my obituary in the newspaper. Eleanor Vance, beloved aunt, died tragically from complications of Alzheimer's disease. She is survived by her devoted niece Kimberly, who cared for her with grace and patience during her final months. That's the story they would have told, and no one would have questioned it because it fit the narrative they'd so carefully constructed. But I found that pill bottle. I trusted my instincts. I fought back. And I survived. 3 years later, I'm still here. Still angry sometimes, still heartbroken about losing the girl I raised, but also still strong, still sharp, and still determined that my story will help someone else recognize the warning signs before it's too late. So if you're watching this and something about your situation feels wrong, if the people who say they love you are isolating you, controlling your money, managing your medications, and making you feel like you're losing your mind, trust yourself. You're not confused. You're not paranoid. You're not imagining things. Your instincts are trying to save your life, and you need to listen to them before it's too late. Family isn't who you're born to. It's who shows up when you need them. It's who believes you when everyone else says you're crazy. It's who fights for you when you're too tired to fight for yourself. I lost the family I was born with, the family I raised, the family I thought would care for me in my final years. But I found a better family along the way. Rachel, Diane, Dr. Chen, and the 200 people we've helped at Sarah's house who understand what it means to survive your own relatives. I'm 69 years old now. I probably have another 10 or 15 good years left, maybe 20 if I'm lucky, and I'm going to spend every one of those years making sure that what happened to me doesn't happen to someone else. That's my purpose now, the meaning I've found in the wreckage of my relationship with Kimberly. I turned my pain into protection for others, my trauma into advocacy, my near-death into a reason for living that's bigger than just survival. People ask me sometimes if I'm lonely, living alone at my age with no family to speak of. The answer is no. I'm surrounded by people who actually care about me, not about what they can inherit from me. I wake up every morning in my small apartment, make my own breakfast without worrying about what's been added to my smoothie, take medications I've chosen for myself, and feel grateful for every single boring, ordinary, blessed day of continued existence. Because here's what I learned. Being alive is a gift, even when it's painful, even when it's complicated, even when the people you loved most in the world try to take it away from you. And as long as I'm breathing, as long as I'm fighting, as long as I'm telling this story so others can recognize the warning signs, then Kimberly didn't win. She took 7 months of my life. She took my sense of security. She took my belief that family was forever. But she didn't take my life. And she didn't take my voice. So I'm using that voice now to say what I needed someone to tell me when I first started feeling confused. You're not crazy. You're not losing your mind. If something feels wrong, it probably is wrong. And you deserve to be believed, protected, and safe, no matter how old you are, no matter how confused you seem, no matter how devoted your family appears to be. That's my story. That's how I survived my own niece trying to murder me for $3 million. And if even one person watching this recognizes themselves in what I've described, if even one person decides to trust their instincts and reach out for help before it's too late, then every terrible moment of those 7 months will have meant something. Thank you for listening. Thank you for believing me. And if you're in a situation like mine, please don't wait. Call Adult Protective Services. Call a lawyer like Rachel. Call someone who will listen. Your life is worth fighting for, even when the people who should love you most have decided it isn't. I'm Eleanor Vance. I'm 69 years old, and I'm still here.